to see that man, to see that international material, to see that peace ambassador. I can't wait to see him.
You find yourself powerless? Do you? That's not true. That's not true. You have a secret weapon. I shouldn't be saying this, but you have a secret weapon. And it is the most powerful weapon on the face of this earth. And that weapon is your choice. It's all yours. Nobody can touch it. Choose peace over chaos. Choose love over hate. Choose respect over disregard. Choose clarity over confusion. And you will find, discover your power. And that's the same power you're going to need when you get out of here.
I would like to thank Mr. Prem for changing our lives. You know, coming here in Sonorvatro Maximum Prison, it really changed people's life a lot. He cannot change our circumstances, but he can help us to choose our attitude.
If I wanted something, I took it.
I came from selling drugs. I poisoned my neighborhood.
Yeah, baby, I'm on top.
For the past 20 years, 17 of those years I've been locked up. I started hanging around the wrong crowds that introduced me to the needle. That's when I started coming to state jails.
If you've never been told that you're worth a damn.
My mom and my dad were heroin addicts.
I lost all contact with my heart.
All of that emotion will come out in actions that will get you into trouble.
They can't build prisons and produce a safer society. It is going to take something very different.
You are something living, existing, breathing, evolving human being.
I started to learn things about myself, that things don't have to be so complicated.
I don't need to put a mask on anymore.
There's a lot of things you gotta do when you get out. All these obstacles you gotta go through. You no longer have food, water, and shelter.
I've got a target on my back. It's not hard for me to go back to prison.
I'm panicking here, and I want to go back to my old way of living.
But everybody's still looking for that old person. They don't believe that somebody can change.
So I shall start. I think there's just a few people coming. My lords, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to the British Film Institute. The British Film Institute was formed under a royal charter in 1933, and one of its key purposes is education through film. It also houses the British National Archive of Films, dating back to 1895, and it consists of over 10,000 titles. I hope you've enjoyed watching Inside Peace. This is an award-winning documentary which has had at least 8 film festival awards in the United States, including Best Documentary. I'd like to welcome everybody because I know that many people have come from some very interesting organizations and come from a very long distance, including people from South Africa, from Malaysia, from the United States, and a special warm Irish welcome to the contingent from Mountjoy Prison in Dublin. Thank you for coming. Before I introduce the panel, I'd just like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank our hosts today, the Prem Rawat Foundation and the Tutu Foundation UK. And I'm very grateful to Clive Conway, chair of the Tutu Foundation, for all of his support in helping to put this event together. As you'll see from the programme, Archbishop Desmond Tutu is aware of this event and has sent a message of encouragement and best wishes for the success today. Just before I hand over to Lord McNally, who will be chairing the panel, I just wanted to mention one fact to you. Last week, the Global Peace Index was published by the Institute of Economics and Peace, one of the world's top think tanks. It calculates the annual cost of conflict in the world at $13.6 trillion. That's trillion dollars every single year. That's 13.3% of the world's GDP, and it equates to $1,800 for every man, woman, and child on the planet. This is without reference, of course, to the incalculable human costs of violence. Crime and incarceration form a significant part of that cost. But it's also estimated that just a 2% reduction in those costs could pay for the entire UN Millennium Development Goals, eradicating extreme poverty and disease throughout the world. Perhaps I'm a dreamer, but maybe, just maybe, the subject matter of today's documentary points in a small way to changing not only the monetary equation, but the human equation too. I'd now like to hand over to the chair of our panel today, our very distinguished panel, Lord McNally. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm both pleased and honoured to be here. The last time I was in this room was at a special viewing of the BBC's Doctor Who Christmas special. To the Whovians among you, welcome. My name is Tom McNally. I was a minister at the Ministry of Justice in the last government, and I'm now the chairman of the Youth Justice Board for England and Wales, and I'm very proud to be ambassador for the Tutu Foundation. I'm also, incidentally, a member of the BFI, and those of you that were able to attend the Inside Peace documentary will have had a reminder of the power of film to send strong messages and champion worthwhile causes. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce the panel. I know you're all shrinking violets, but when I read out your name, if you just acknowledge yourself while I tell the audience who you are. First, Dion Dupries. Dion is senior serving prison officer in South Africa with 32 years experience, including at the correction facilities of Zonderwater, Bavian Sport, and as a prison governor at Heidelberg, as well as serving at Pollsmoor and Robben Island, the latter two being where Nelson Mandela was incarcerated at various times. Dion has overseen the peace education program for the last 7 years at Zonderwater. Dion, good to see you. Next, Jerry Marshall. Jerry is a former head of the Thames Valley Probation Board. He's held the Probation Chiefs Association for Equality, Diversity and Restorative Restorative Justice. Let me see. Now this is always the danger when you are handed a piece of paper. I'll have to go back to the original document because there's a gap in it. If you just want to talk among yourselves while I usually have some useful anecdotes to also use at this time, but fortunately I've now got to the right page. Sir Alan Ward. Ah, there you are. Sir Alan is former Lord Justice of the Court of Appeal in England and Wales. He has represented both Oliver Tambo and the late Nelson Mandela in South Africa. I also know that Sir Alan is a champion of mediation in the justice system, and when I once addressed a conference in Central Hall, he as chairman gave me one of the hardest times that I'd had as minister. Revenge is sweet. On my right is Peter Clark. Peter was the former head of the New Scotland Yard Counter-Terrorist Branch and non-executive director of the UK Serious and Organised Crime Agency and a member of the board of the Charity Commission. In 2016, Peter was appointed Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons. John Biggin. John has 16 years' experience in the prison service in the UK, running 3 complex prisons, including HMP Tameside, where the Peace Education Programme is running. In 2010, he was voted Public Servant of the Year by the Guardian newspaper and made an OBE in 2014. And Joseph Duncan, there he is. Joseph is the Tutu Foundation UK's Ubuntu project leader in the London Borough of Southwark and co-founder of Youth Futures, working with young people and the police to tackle violence, drug offence and troubled youth in that borough. There's nobody at the other side of you. No, have we got? Yes. Who? Now I haven't got a note for you. Would you like to introduce yourself then?
Wait.
Yeah, you're all right, Blair. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Blair, and I'm a youth mentor and facilitator at Youth Futures. So I'll just be here to answer any question and just to lend my support to Joseph. So yeah.
Great. So any ideas that you had that this is all stage managed are by now completely, but at least I now know what my next duty and pleasure is, and that is to introduce Prem Rawat. Prem has been speaking on the subject of peace for over 50 years, addressing people internationally and at many institutions, including the UN, the European Parliament, the British Parliament, and several others. He founded the Prem Rawat Foundation in 2001, which has delivered the Peace Education Programme to over 195 correctional facilities across 5 continents and to thousands of inmates. He's been awarded the keys of over 20 cities around the world, including the Freedom of the City of London, in recognition of his work for peace. In 2012, he was awarded the Brand Laureate International Lifetime Achievement Award, previously given to Hillary Clinton and the late Nelson Mandela. it gives me real pride and pleasure to ask Prem Rawat to address us.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. And what I want to really express to you, you've already seen the documentary, that there are certain traits to us human beings. It's not a grid, it's not a box. That all of us, as we are alive in this world today, we face many things that are wrong. We face many things that are right. But as human beings, no matter what comes across our face, what comes across our experiences, we never lose the ability to have compassion. We never lose the ability to better ourselves. No matter how long we have slid down, we still always will possess a capability to improve ourselves. And it is on these fundamentals that the Peace Education Program exists. It is not to judge people. It is not to declare whether something is right or something is wrong. It is not to pass blame, but it is to acknowledge that as a human being, each one of us possesses a strength, seldom exercised, but nonetheless, we always have that strength. When we were born, we were vulnerable. We had no education to rely on. We had no physical strength to speak of that we could stand up and say, "Come on, I'll take you on." Maybe at one stage, we could not even walk. Now, I don't know how many of you remember that, but it'll happen to all of you. But in that state, you had something. Nobody could explain to you why you should walk, but you knew you had a strength to be able to walk, and you made an effort. Was this effort actually rewarded by a certificate? No. Was this a lecture that you went to where they told you, oh, by the way, you really should walk, and this is how what walking is like, and a big movie screen with, people walking, and look, people from all walks of life walk, so better get with the program. No, you didn't know any of this. But you had a strength in you, a want in you to want to walk. And you exercised that. And you made more mistakes in the beginning than you got it right. But eventually, you also overcame your mistakes. And one day, you could walk. And then one day, you could run. This valiant effort, even though it looks very trivial and seems very trivial, was in fact transforming. It transformed you. It changed you. You became independent. You could go where you wanted to go. You were not dependent upon your mommy or your daddy and just going, Now you could go on your own. You could run up the stairs. And there was a power in it. But rarely do we ever sit down and think about that power. But that power has existed every single day in your life. It is present, waiting to be exercised again every morning that you get up. But do you? There is a real human problem, a severe human problem. And it comes naturally to all of us. This is a problem of the brain. Our brain, human brain, is a very strange thing. Incredible, but strange. And one of the things this brain likes to do is not have to compute things. It's like that. There's a scientific documentary. In fact, a scientist spent quite a few hundreds of thousands of dollars coming up with the proof for this, but this is how it is. And I'll tell you, because he could have come to me, I could have told him that for free. And this is how it works. You live in your house. Your house has a smell. You don't notice it. You're used to it. Your house also has a lot of noise, but you don't hear it. You get used to it. Then one day the electricity goes off, and you realize, my goodness, it's quiet. This getting used to is the brain's way of coping with the situation. So another example would be when people come to California from India, and California has nice warm weather, and they're wearing a sweater because they're coming from almost 180-degree weather, or 45 degrees or 70 degrees seems like, and they come to California and it's cold for them. And then there are people who come from cold places and it's so warm. Because this is how we adapt to getting used to things. Why am I telling you this? Because this is exactly what happens in our societies. We simply start to adapt to all the cheating and the lying that takes place. Right down to the point where we know we are being cheated. We are being told a lie. And there's no question about it. But we simply accept it. Because we are used to it. And when you hear this statement, think outside the box, there's more to it than you realize. There is a box. And that box is where your head is, buried. And you only see the world in that box. And what you need to do every day is say no. I want to know the facts. I want to know the facts. I am a human being. In this box, a human being doesn't get too many points. How do I know that? Because that's why we have Superman. We're not really good enough because we have gotten used to our behaviors. And we sometimes only look at the negative behaviors. We don't look at the positive behaviors. In fact, there is a lot of good in this world. In fact, I would say, please congratulate yourself, you're interested in peace. This good, distinguished gentlemen are assembled in this panel. People who deal with inmates every single day, but they have compassion. Compassion. This is what I have seen. That compassion makes a big difference. And if we don't want to let this cycle continue, the cycle of destruction, then the only way is to break it, not get used to it. We have to ask ourselves, yes, we have institutions where we incarcerate people. We keep creating new laws every year, like we were playing a card game. even though those laws are not serving anything. We don't stop and look at the effectiveness of our actions. I'm a pilot. When I push a button, I expect something to happen. If it doesn't happen, I know I have to pull out a checklist. That's wrong. If I turn something off, it should turn off. If I turn something on, it should turn on. I have to look at the results of my action. Do we do that? Do we ever take a stop and say, is this working? Or simply, the solution, we need a bigger prison. There's only so many people, there's a lot of people on this earth, but there's only so many. Pretty soon everybody's going to be in. And outside is going to be the weird place. Already in California, it costs for every inmate $65,000. That just happens to be a salary in America of a school teacher. So we're not improving. We make a lot of schools, but we never judge the quality of education. I was talking to some kids in India, 150 kids to one classroom. So just imagine what kind of quality of education do they get? None. Eventually they drop out, and even when they graduate and come out of the school, they feel like the same person that they went in. These things are important. Quality of education is important. Quality of life is important. Quality of air is important. Quality of water is important. And the gift of compassion that we can give to each other. Right now, this is not what is happening. Now, please don't sit there and pass a judgment on me saying that's not going to work. I'm just pointing out that's important. How will that happen? Will require every one of us on the face of this earth to say we need to make a difference. That peace will be mankind's finest achievement, not destruction. Right now, trillions of dollars is spent in making war. Wars are not free. It costs a lot of money to make war. Consider this, for peace, it costs nothing. You don't have to do anything, just don't do anything. And so, what I'm saying here is maybe we're not on the right track. Around the world, we are not on the right track. We are talking about prosperity, but we are talking about prosperity without peace. And then people say, well, we should all study history. Why should we study history if we're not going to pay any attention to it? When you look at it historically, it has proven itself that prosperity without peace rips itself apart, as it is ripping itself apart today. We have more cell phones, we have more universities, we have more money, we have everything. More. What we don't have is peace, and it's not ultimately working. So this is my effort. I want to promote the good. I want the good to be garnered wherever it exists, not the hate, not the reasons, but I want everyone to start looking for the reason to promote the good even in those institutions where one would be hard-pressed to find anything good. Believe me, good exists. Believe me, good exists. And that is the effort of the Peace Education Program. Why does Peace Education Program work? Well, it works. And that's how I found out about it. It works. And If it works, great. And I hope that all of you make some effort to find the good in you and promote the good in you. So, thank you very much.
Now, what I'd like to do, having listened to Prem and seen the documentary and know about the work that's being done, is to ask each member of the panel in 2 or 3 minutes just to give a contribution to discussion which might provoke thoughts and questions and discussions from the floor. And I'll move along this way, so I'll ask first Sir Alan Ward to just say a few words.
Thank you very much. I first went to prison, or perhaps more accurately, I first visited a prison as a young man in Pretoria on the instructions of Nelson Mandela's firm in Johannesburg to convey the desperate message to a young African from the Transkei, miles away, but they all came to Pretoria to be hanged, that his appeal had been refused and a date of execution was set for next week. And the transformation from the smiling, polite man to a virtual gibbering wreck, the look of total terror in his eyes, convinced me of the inhumanity of that punishment. And perhaps I've been a softie ever since, because all punishments seem to me to be essentially pointless. At the judicial training we received, I tended to give probation, or at worst a community service order, until rebuked by being told you're here not to exercise social service functions, but justice functions, and that's to punish. I never really believed it. Now I'm a mediator, believing passionately in that. And at a meeting of European judges, I heard the president of the Dutch Supreme Court say he was a criminal lawyer, that was his area of practice. And he wanted to tell us of their use of restorative justice, which involves putting together in the right case, and not all of them are suitable, the victim and the offender. And it is a transforming experience for both. There, if it has the prospect of working, sentences are delayed until the process is complete, and the young offender, invariably young, is given a non-custodial sentence rather than 3 years straight inside. The result, he told us, was a drop in the prison population and a drop in the rate of recidivism. And it seemed to me so much better a message than I read shortly after the return that the Ministry of Justice was spending millions, if not billions, building 3 more prisons to conduct the totally useless task of locking these people up with no education, because there are no people to teach or no sufficient warders, and they learn only to be better criminals. How much better for restorative justice to force the prisoner to do what Prem has urged is necessary. Look at the result of your actions, and to see from the victim that compassion and that offer of peace, which is the transforming element of a complete change in the young people whose lives would be blighted by prison, but who are being given a chance they are only too keen to take. I heartily commend it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Jerry Marshall.
I'm really glad I'm at this end of the table, to be honest, because if I've already lost part of what I wanted to say, at that end of the table I'd have nothing left at all. I'm currently a restorative justice assessor for schemes up and down the country, and
sorry,
that's perfectly all right.
Stealing your thunder.
No, we should celebrate it wherever we can. It's fine, and I'll come back to it. One of the things that I was having a conversation just before the film started, about why I'd spent 40 years working with offenders and what it'd been like, and why I hadn't become a vicar as I'd originally intended. And I explained that I was too young to become a deacon straight away, so I had to spend a year working with offenders or doing something. And I worked with offenders, and I just found the authenticity and the humour of the people I worked with so much more captivating than what I saw in the church I attended. I mean, the glib, I preferred criminals to Christians is too simple, but it has a real validity to it as well. And I talked about them as people. And as some colleagues in the room will remember, about 15 years ago, the probation service was finally told we couldn't refer to offenders as clients anymore. We had to call them offenders. I sort of got the message from today's film that actually it's time we stopped using labels quite so freely and systematically as we do. I've had a wonderful, humorous, authentic time for 40 years, but I have seen a lot of programs working with people in prison and in the community. And I'm conscious that so many of the programs are required to have a psychological model of change, and I don't know what Prem's psychological model of change is. I see change, but to sell it and persuade, we may need to do more than that. Somehow organisations need to be able to describe a change, and change is what we're talking about. The other thing that struck me was, and picking up the restorative justice view, there was no victim perspective. This was very much about the offenders, about it talked about the consequences for them and those they loved, but there are consequences at various ripples all the way around that we need to take account of. Now, whether that matters in this programme or whether that belongs somewhere else is for discussion, but remembering victims for me is very important. Systematically within the British system, the focus on the offence has been sort of absolute, and yet this apparently didn't talk about the offence committed. It said, that's in the past, what's the potential for the future? And I'm torn on that one as to how much I think when you want offenders to change, you have to talk about offending all the time, or how much you talk about them as people. That's enough from me for now.
Thank you. I don't think other members of the panel should worry about what goes before. I always like the story of the chairman who banged his gavel, said everything on this subject has now been said. Unfortunately, not everybody has finished saying it. Jerry, you did ask some interesting questions that might come up later in discussion. Next is Peter Clark.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The moment I finished here this afternoon, I'm going to prison. I'm going to join a team of my inspectors who have been carrying out an inspection of a prison for some days, and I shall spend the next 2 days with them. And I have to say that extraordinarily powerful film that we watched earlier will have an impact on the way in which I look at not only the prison I'm going to this evening, but every other prison I inspect in the coming months and years. And when I was watching the film, I was trying to do a little bit of comparing and contrasting and trying to think, well, the title on here is The Potential for Prison Peace Education. How much potential is there from what I've seen in the few brief months that I've been the Chief Inspector of Prisons in our prisons to actually do the sort of thing that we saw there in Texas? What are the differences, apart from the fact that in Texas clearly lots of people wear their hats indoors? What did strike me as well is that actually, in order for the process that we saw take place, the prisoners have to have room, they have to have space, they have to have thinking time, they have to have time to interact with each other, they have to get to the classroom on a regular basis. And that set me to thinking about, well, what have I seen in the UK that could get in the way and deny the potential that we talk about on the front of this brochure? And it's simply this, that I'm afraid, although we have unprecedented political commitment. And we have a Prime Minister who's put his personal authority behind prison reform. We have a reforming Secretary of State for Justice, at least until next Thursday. And so with that unprecedented political impetus, what is it that actually could get in the way of achieving what we saw on the film? And I'm afraid I have to say that I have seen already far too many prisons that are too dangerous, too full of drugs to enable that sort of activity to take place. In far too many of our prisons, people are locked up for unacceptably long periods of the day. There are too many prisoners, there are not enough staff, the variables are all wrong, and so the aspiration, which is there, a noble aspiration to put education and rehabilitation and resettlement at the heart of the prison's objectives, I can see this whole thing being undermined unless we can change the way, in some fundamental ways, in which prisons operate. At the moment, there are some very good education programs in prisons, but all too often, people simply can't get to them. And they can't get to the training, and they can't get to the work which is supplied. Not enough work and not enough meaningful work, but they can't get to it at the moment in too many places because, unfortunately, and I think the biggest influence here is these things called NPS, new psychoactive substances, drugs, unpredictable in their impact. Some prisons are awash with them. Our surveys that we carry out of prisoners say in some prisons, 50% of prisoners say it's easy or very easy to get their hands on these drugs, which are having a completely destabilizing effect in too many prisons. So until these basic fundamental problems are sorted in our prisons, I'm afraid the potential is not what it should be.
Thanks very much. Next, John Biggins. Biggin.
I suppose I ought to be a little bit careful as a former prison director following the new Chief Inspector of Prisons onto the stand. Forgive me, I don't normally use notes, but today I'm going to use some because what normally happens is I'll set off and go off at a tangent and then forget what I was going to say. And I've got some fairly important points I want to make about working with the police education programme in prisons. So just bear with me, please.
I'm glad you have, John, because I wouldn't like to try and tell you to shut up.
Yeah, so a bit about why I got involved with the programme and a bit about working with them. So I think it's fair to say that prisons are complex and their needs are diverse, and the mainstream isn't always capable of delivering to those individual needs. We tend to do things in great big chunks, hitting groups of people but missing out lots of people through the system, and prisoners find that incredibly frustrating, particularly those prisoners, ironically, who are the ones that we're actually trying to challenge and trying to help to change the way they behave. Their lives can feel like a never-ending spiral, and they find themselves caught up in a system that defaults to the usual suspects. And it becomes a downhill race, and I guess the point I'm making is that my job as a prison leader, I see my job as a prison leader to be not to stop them falling, but to help them to first find and then apply the brakes. And kind of leading into why I became interested in the work that the foundation does. I think that over quite an extensive career, I've been in prisons ever since I was a young man. So most of my adult life I've spent behind bars, my side of the bars. But I think over the last prison that I've operated, I've become acutely sensitive to recognising approaches that, whilst may not appear the mainstream, and certainly ones that are not accompanied by the suitcase full of research and evaluation that normally allow prison governors to commission programmes. I've been lucky enough to work for an organisation as well. I work for a private sector organisation where I have the autonomy to decide what happens, and I have the ability to prioritise and to take a strategic decision to embed programmes when I recognise that they're going to do good. So I'm thankful for the organisation that I've been looking into to work for. Thameside, I was managing a prison which, actually, if you look at the film, Thameside is a South East London local prison. A third of my population probably are gang affiliated. You would expect high levels of violence, and you would expect lots of issues around drugs and everything else, everything that accompanies a complex London prison. So when this meeting appeared in my diary with the Peace Education Programme, because I generally throw my diary open to new things. I kind of sat and listened to a description of what the programme was all about. So I think it's not difficult to see the logic that led me to conclude that actually a lot of the issues that people were dealing with here are replicated within my prison. You know, we work in an environment in prisons now where there are rising violence, rising issues of self-harm. So anything that's really introspective and really led by the individual, and I think this is really important, because desistance is not a silver bullet, it's a process. And my job is to get prisoners to the right place and give them the support and help that they need to motivate them to want to change. So programs like the Peace Education, on the face of it, were really likely to fulfill that. So I was more than happy, and literally no hesitation. In fact, I think I wheeled the team straight down to my head of reducing reoffending's office, sat them down in there and said, look, I want this to happen. And that was some time ago now. Thank you. And we're now on the 6th programme, I believe, at Thameside. It's fully integrated and embedded into my reducing reoffending strategy, again, because I was able to do that, because I recognise its worth. And do you know what? From a personal perspective, I don't need the evaluation and the research up front, because I'm the one that gets to sit down with the guys afterwards. And I'm the one that gets to hear their stories. And I'm the one that gets to see the effect that the programme has on them. So I think from my perspective, I would like to see the Transforming Prisons agenda, if it comes to fruition, placing more autonomy with governors to actually commission programmes that, that the gut says are the right things to do, could create a tremendous opportunity for embedding programmes like this and to move away from the norm and to actually really physically and psychologically make that change. So I'm a big fan, as you could probably tell. And wherever I end up, if I end up in another prison, I'll be knocking on Prem's door, because I think that more people should. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next, Dion Dupreez.
Thank you, Chair. Can you all hear me? That's good afternoon, everyone. I must just indicate to you that the first weekend in June, I visit Mama Lungwe with my wife, where we, in fact, visit the lodge, seeing giraffes and elephants. The following weekend, I reported for duty at Sonnewater Prison, or Correctional Centre. And today, I'm sitting in London. Can you believe it? I'm also sharing with you that when I get on the plane, it's the first time that I'm getting into a plane. And fortunately for me, for PEP, that I'm climb on that plane with peace, and I get to London in peace. Ladies and gentlemen, I personally think I'm the person who can indicate to you that PEP is working. 2009, the PEP process started at Sonnewater, where I got involved. The program was quality assured by my management team, and they called me and indicated to me that I must sign the contract between PEP South Africa and Correctional Services South Africa. And there I personally put myself in gears to assist this team to make it a success. 2009, we are heading for 2017, and I'm heading for 800 offenders who completed PEP. Now, in my position, I'm one of the senior officials at Sonnewater. I'm appointed as the chairperson Case Management Committee. And unfortunately, I must give you a lecture of my procedures and all my acts. Ladies and gentlemen, Sonnewater medium A maximum is an ultra maximum. I personally think it's an ultra maximum. The reason for that is that we are housed, our inmates up till now, that was reported this morning, 1,537 inmates. 570 of them serving life and more. Means I personally think it's ultra maximum. I'm working as a chairperson CMC, and according with my act, I must see this offender as a chairperson on admission. I must go through the process of assessment. Thereafter, I must orientate him, tell him what is going to happen in the beginning and what am I going to expect from him. Then my act also indicates to me that I must see this offender every 2 times in a year. That means every 6 months I must see the offender, checking what is the progress. Usually when we admit offenders, then I will be the chairperson of the committee who must draft a sentence plan for this offender. And then at a certain stage I ask myself, this correctional programs, is it really working? And then, fortunately for me, PEP is coming into the process. And then I told myself, let us start with PEP. Let the guy start getting hope. Let the guy realize that he made mistakes to get here. And now I, as an instrument, must assist this guy to get hope and also to assist him to make the right decisions. I must also state that our correctional programs is not compulsory. All our programs is voluntary and the offender must make his own choice. When we start with the process, really, as the film indicated, there was not so lot of guys who reported for the program. But as we go along, the people is putting their names on the list. We want to start this program. And on this stage, I'm using PEP for my restorative justice, when we start the process of restorative justice. So I personally think when you have peace in yourself, if you have hope, if you have all the answers to know what is expecting from you, then we can start the process, and then we will follow up and ask the guy, can you give us more information of the victim's address? Do you know the victim? And then we will start the process. These ladies and gentlemen, I'm sitting here all the way from South Africa, and I'm telling you in London that PEP is working in South Africa. In conclusion, I can also indicate to you that 30% of my population cannot read and write. And if you can make your sums, you can also realize that the half of my population cannot read. And PEP at a certain stage last year indicated to me, but Dion, we can assist you in this process. Means next year, 2017, we are going to start a program that is going to assist us. We have a program on our own, Reading for Redemption. Means we are going to link PEP there into that process to motivate guys to start reading. In this process of PEP, my biggest challenge is language. I discovered, I think 2012, but really I have a problem. The guys don't want to come to my program or the program due to language problems. And the Creator is asking me to do my work good, and I must do my work good. That means that I'm the instrument of everything. Let I come up with initiatives. Then I went to the units and I asked the guys who already done the program, can you assist me? And some of the guys indicated to me, sir, we have the answer. So I appointed facilitators in all the units. And when Prem Rose is giving this introduction or his DVD, we will form groups. And then these guys will translate the DVD for the guys. Also at the end, he will also give a summary. That means language is also not a problem in South Africa. Thank you.
Joseph Duncan.
Thanks. Yeah, my name's Joseph Duncan, and I'm a facilitator with the Tutu Foundation, and also run a youth project here in London in Camberwell called Youth Futures. With the Tutu Foundation, we run Ubuntu workshops up and down the country in areas where there's conflict. And I just think it's really exciting listening to everybody here today, because what we're beginning to witness is these new industries of restorative justice and restorative practice, these industries which are going to start raising people's consciousness, start raising people's potential, are beginning to emerge, and they're beginning to get a little bit more institutionalized, which I think is really exciting. This is a new development. Somebody said a little thing about evaluation and how important it is that these projects and programs and initiatives are evaluated and that they're recognized for the value that they bring, and that it's something that people can relate to, you know, in the mainstream. And I think we're beginning to get there. You know, we're talking about people finding work, we're talking about reoffending rates going down, we're talking about people getting bank accounts set up, about getting their immigration status sorted. We're talking about people's confidence in different situations going up, and you can evaluate these things. Some of them might be quite soft, but they can be evaluated. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is that all of these, what we're calling, you know, offenders, you know, they're human beings, and we've recently been running a roundtable with police officers and young people, some of which are young offenders. And what we've noticed is, you know, it's like taking a cork out of the bottle. You know, young people and police officers suddenly just burst out with all of their stories and testimonies and experiences, things that they want to tell, you know, the other person on the other side of the conflict. And creating spaces where these people get a opportunity to share their common humanity and share their stories, to be authentic, it's really powerful. And I just think, you know, we need to do a lot more in creating more opportunities like that. So thank you, Prem, Rawat, and others, in lighting the way around showing us what's possible, making a big difference. And yeah, I hope that we can keep generating pathways for offenders to find their place in society.
Yeah. Last but not least, Blair.
All right, today I'm gonna speak as a youth facilitator and youth worker and mentor, but I'm also gonna speak a little bit about my personal experience and how the movie that we just watched, or the film that we just watched, spoke to me as a person. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about myself, just to start off with. Kicked out of school at 14, trouble with the law, and I went from that to where I am now. I went from that to speaking with a lot of people from Southwark, mostly, because that's mainly where we're based, about community safety. We actually ended up going to Home Office, me and someone else from Youth Futures, and really, like, the film just demonstrates speaking to someone as a person before you speak to them as an offender. And I can speak as someone who's been in trouble with the law. That's really appreciated by a lot of people. It goes a long way. And I went to Home Office and all that stuff just because someone gave me the opportunity to, someone gave me the responsibility to do that. And that kind of built up confidence to start making a change in my life, start doing positive things, because it had become apparent to me that I can actually do positive things in my life, and we're still moving forward. Yeah, that's about it. I'm not really much of a public speaker, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite contributions from the audience. The pithier the better, because we'll get more people in. But that lady there, yes, please. Yes? You've got a mic.
Thank you. Yeshim Harris.
If you want to address a particular person,
yes,
say
I will.
so.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. I will, yeah. Yeshim Harris from NG Conflict Management. My question really is to all the distinguished members and all male panel, but in particular to the Chief Inspector of Prison. I just went to see Michael Moore's latest movie, which I really recommend and everybody see. Part of it is in one of the prisons in Norway, and I heard about the prison system in Norway, but watching it I was amazed, because we're talking about punishment. If we have a line from punishment and the other end is restorative justice and healing, we are, in this country, more punishment, and then initiatives like Inside Peace is trying to bring more of an element of restoration and healing. There, it's all about restoration and healing. The inmates have their own flats, completely sort of like a very normal being, except that they're not free. And someone asks, and Michael Moore asks, what about punishment? And then they say, well, actually, punishment doesn't really heal anybody. So my question to you is this. I'm sure within your very valuable work, you have looked at other systems, other countries' systems. And this is, I'm not making a point, it's a genuine question. Why does that work there, bearing in mind that the rate of crime is very low as well? So something's working. What is working there that we could bring to this country? Thank you.
Peter, it goes to you.
Yes, thank you very much for such a simple question. And I have to admit that in the 4 months I've been in this job, I haven't yet had the chance to go to Norway, although I have heard about some of the ways in which their penal system works. I'd like to think it wouldn't be entirely impossible for the punitive and the restorative to work together, but it will need that space. I mean, the punitive side has nothing to do with me. That's all to do with the courts, the sentence of the courts, and the political judgments that sit behind what laws and what sentences are available, and so on and so forth. My job is to look at these places and to establish, obviously their role is to hold people securely, and that's the rationale of a prison. But as far as I'm concerned, what I want to look when I look at them is to see, are they safe? Are they decent places? Are people being held in respectful conditions? Are the activities which they're being asked to undertake or being required to undertake, are they actually purposeful? And I've seen, I'm afraid, far too much activity that is not purposeful in any way, shape or form. And are people being prepared to be resettled back into their communities? All too often, I'm afraid those questions are being answered in the negative at the moment in this country. It is absolutely not the function of prison to punish beyond the sentence of the court. The sentence of the court is the punishment. The conditions in which people are held should not be an additional punishment. And the whole rationale, the way in which the inspectorate works in this country is that we're not a regulator. We don't look to see whether prisons are abiding by the 44,000 pages of prison service instructions that are issued by the Ministry of Justice. We measure against international human rights standards, and that gives us an objectivity and an independence which is hugely important, so that we can look at prisons and we can speak truth under power, as it were. No one can tell me what to write in my reports, no one can tell me when to publish them. We can write exactly what we like, which is why several of my distinguished predecessors have had enormous difficulties in their relationships with secretaries of state. And already I've been told several times that unless I have a public and enormous falling out with the Secretary of State at some point during my tenure, I will have to regard it as having been a failure. That's a long way of not answering your question. But basically, I agree that entirely that if we're going to break the cycle of destruction that Prem referred to, we have to find a more purposeful way of using that time when people are in custody.
Lady in red, and then the gentleman who doesn't believe I've seen him, but I have. If you pass the microphone back to the gentleman behind you. Lady first.
Thank you. Carol Stone. I'm pleased to be an ambassador for the Tutu Foundation. I think the film, it was long, but I think it was very, very good, and I think it made its points well, and I don't think any of us can disagree with what you're trying to do. I've been on diets many years, and I've lost weight, and I put weight on again. And I just wonder that when you're in the prison, you're in the environment, the wonderful transformation that came on the people's faces that we saw was a joy to behold. But when they go out to temptation, when they go out into society, I wonder if you're any way you can make sure that once they're home, once they're back to where they were in the environment and in their workplace, is there a way you can make sure that you can keep them scooped up? Is there a sort of an inside piece workshop you can have once a month, or any way keep a track of them in any way, or let them come back to you if they want to? Because temptation they will find, that little boy at the table with his mum, I thought, my God, if he goes out and someone offers him to have a drug, how can he keep that resolve? How can he keep it? Is there any way? Wonderful work. I'm absolutely delighted to even be a little part of it, but is there a way that we can make sure it keeps going?
Pat, Dion first, and then John might follow that up. Is there any follow-up?
In my position, ma'am, thank you for the question. I mean, in my position, I'm in the maximum institution. Means I'm taking an offender through up to a quarter of his sentence. Then I'm considering him to reclassification for a medium institution. To answer your question, my motivation always was that when you start talking about peace, you must talk peace right through. Means that is the way that I do it in our correctional center. We are using this DVDs and CDs and playing it on the system that people can start talking about peace on a daily basis. Unfortunately, I cannot give you the answer of people that is released. I'm only going up to the stage where I reclassify, and then I'm transferring them to a medium institution. But if you look at that statistics, I never, from 2009, I reclassified my offenders to go to a medium, and I never readmit a guy again. Means if you go and look at that stats, then we are 100%.
I would like to respond to that a little bit. One of the, peace education program isn't one of those programs that started off with, okay, here's the package, here's the program, and this is the result we're looking for. It actually started very simply, very basically. Okay, here's a nice message. I think your inmates would like to hear it. But then the consequence of that subsequently was that the return rate was the lowest. So right there is your cue. There's something happens where even after they have been released from prison, they continue and they get involved in the community. In fact, I know quite a few of them have become facilitators. And so it keeps them quite busy. There was a gentleman who was incarcerated in the Greek prison in Greece, and he had joined the peace education program, and then his date came up and he was released. After he was released, he actually went to the warden and said, "Can I come back and finish this program?" So there's quite a few stories like that. There was, in fact, another story, and that just happened in the beginning of this year. I did an event in Los Angeles, and there were 2 inmates who had been released, and they flew out from New Orleans to the event that I was doing in Los Angeles. In that event, I gave a story of 2 wolves, and very briefly, there was a Indian chief approached by a little kid in his camp who said, "Chief, I have a question. And my question is, I see some of the people are good some of the times, and the same people who are good some of the times are bad the other times. Why is that?" And the chief looked at the little boy and said, "Because there are 2 wolves inside of you. They're fighting. There's a good wolf and there's a bad wolf." And the boy then asked, "Well, Chief, which wolf wins?" And the chief said, "The one you feed. So if you feed the bad wolf, that will win. If you feed the good wolf, that will win." After hearing that story, Both of the inmates flew back to New Orleans, and one of the inmates said, "Take me to the police station." The guy was like, "Why do you want to go to the police station?" He said, "Just take me to the police station." He takes him to the police station. He walks up to the sergeant on the counter and says, "I have done this and this and this, and that could possibly be the breach of my parole." The sergeant looked at him and he said, "What are you talking about? Why are you here? Don't you know? Do you want to go back to prison?" He goes, "No, I don't, but I need to tell you this." The sergeant said, "Okay, I heard it, go home." Then somebody asked the gentleman, he said, "Why did you do that? Even at the cost of the possibility that you could end up back in prison." He said, "I didn't want to feed the bad wolf anymore."
I think, from my perspective as the prison guy, the key is absolutely support through the gate. There's statistics will tell you that somewhere in the region of 70 to 80% of prisoners who are going to reoffend after they're released will do it within the first 3 months, and it's a kind of falling off curve. So the bit that's historically been missing, and you know, the recent arrangements around transforming rehabilitation are helping, but they're not yet delivering that full spectrum of support that's needed. So when I have looked at this within the prison, and I asked the guys again, what would have made the difference? Almost exclusively, it is that support within the first weeks and months of release. Prisons are targeted on getting prisoners into settled accommodation, getting them into employment or education, but they're not in a position to follow up whether or not that person's still living there in a week's time, or they're still going to the college, or they're still going to work. But the support through the gate can provide that extra bit that just gives people, and organisations like the Peace Education Programme, who can transform people into mentors and create networks out there to help support, are absolutely invaluable in that.
I know you've been waiting a long time, but I just wondered, Jerry, whether you've got
Well,
the
yes,
views on through the
I always
gate.
get concerned when we have a very prison-centric conversation that people don't talk about the probation service and the fact that just about every single prisoner who comes out of prison will spend time supervised by a probation officer of some kind. And whatever the impact of prison is reinforced positively by the probation staff in the community. That's provided the community is there and able and has the networks to support that person. Similarly, if somebody gets a job when they come out of prison, if they don't keep it for the first 3 months, actually it doesn't affect their reoffending rate. There are very simplistic models of employment means not reoffending, but actually don't work out in practice. It's about the relationships and the security that's established over a longer period that counts. So AA as an organisation has dealt with the issue of how you follow up people by having networks of meetings where people keep telling each other the stories. I got a sense from the film that some of the guys in the film do meet up and do keep telling the stories, and going off to other institutions is about telling their stories again, and that's very reinforcing. But I think for some people, having a more systematic way of reinforcing that, or communicating to the staff who are going to work with them in the community what has happened while they are in prison, to help them make sense of it.
Gentlemen, don't say you've forgotten the question.
No, it's okay. Thanks very much indeed for giving me the opportunity. I suppose I have a question for Prem, but it stems from the comments that Jerry made earlier, which was probably very rightly, I think, today has focused on people that society has locked up because of things they have done. But having spent a lifetime, a career in Scotland in social services, I've worked with both offenders, but very often the victims of crime as well. So I'm interested to hear about the sense of maybe Prem's idea of the wider potential applicability of the Peace Education Programme, not just for offenders, but maybe for those who've been victims of crime. Organisations like Women's Aid, I mean, it strikes me that people who have been on the other end of that could benefit from the programme itself.
Well, actually, very interestingly enough, there is a program that has been started, Peace Education Program for abused women, and it's in South Africa. So we're clearly seeing, and I'm waiting for the results of it, and they were there in Soweto when I did the event. And I'm waiting for the feedback of how positively and what changes we would need to make to that program. One of the things I've been talking about is a redefinition of the word forgive, which is very, very interesting, because sometimes in our society when we say, okay, you should forgive, that simply means to accept the mediocrity of the other person, the mistakes of the other person. But I tell people, no, what happened to you is wrong. It will always be wrong. But whoever did that to you is still victimizing you. Now, forgiveness is not about accepting that other person's mistakes or his whatever it was, but it is giving yourself a license to move on. And that's what forgiveness means. And in fact, I mentioned that on the radio, and the response of that was very positive, and people really liked that. In fact, all of South Africa is kind of struggling with this whole forgiveness thing. But it is not about accepting the mistake. What happened was wrong, will always be wrong. And it is not saying, okay, yeah, patch it up, but it is actually to decide to move on and not be victimized by it any further.
Now, we're near the end. I'm sorry, I've just seen a third hand, but I can't. I'm going to take this gentleman here and then that lady right at the back. So Mike here and then right at the back. Short questions and we'll get them through before time. You, sir.
Thank you very much. Lee Hayward from Save Our Soldier. Two-part question. Very briefly, the first one is, what's the cost of incarceration for one prisoner for 1 year in the UK? Second part is, we deal with a slightly different group. We deal with the soldiers, and often they are incarcerated, unfortunately, possibly because the justice system doesn't have an understanding or an appreciation for some of the things that they do, and it's too quick and they're in. So we would like to work a program where we help more of them before this situation arises, because of course they're trained warriors, so they deal with people unfortunately very quickly, and then implement something like a PEP program with them after they come out of the military to help prevent it getting to that stage. Okay.
Do you know what the cost is? Yeah.
In terms of the cost, it's quite a difficult thing because it varies according to the type of institution in which people are being held, and it can vary from anything from about, I believe it's, don't hold me to this please, 35,000 to 40,000 at the lower end, right up to 75 or more, according to the type of institution in which someone's being held. That's reassuring. Somebody who really knows what they're talking about is nodding. But just alongside of that, the absolute scandal, and this is a thing that I'm really getting more and more exercised about. It costs that much each year to keep somebody in custody, and we spend around £2 per day on their food. And the food which I've seen in prisons, it does vary a bit from place to place, but some of it is utterly appalling. And I've seen young people, children, who are simply not thriving because their diet, their exercise, their lack of exposure to sunlight and this sort of thing is just totally inadequate. So that's something that's beginning to cause me a huge amount of concern within the £30,000 to £75,000 per capita cost per annum.
When I actually read the statistics for California, 65,000, I think if you gave them just half of it, they wouldn't be in prison. I mean, just volunteer, like, here, just come take it. No. Before you go commit some heinous crime. And I would be very, very interested in trying to develop a program specifically, because right now in America, veterans are doing it completely on their own. And some of them who have been positively helped are taking it to the other veterans. But I would be very, very interested in developing a program specifically for veterans who are coming out, because of the horror stories that I've heard. I mean, when they walk into the war zone, they're in a totally different mindset. They're supermen. When they come out, they have been hit by kryptonite and they can't walk properly. Some people I know who are my friends and some of the colleagues and some people who work for me, I mean, one of the relatives that came back from there just disappeared. I mean, he didn't want to put up with anything. So I am very sympathetic to that, and it is really that they're being victimized. They're victimized by what they see, and they're not prepared for it. There's no way to prepare any young kid for what really happens out there.
That's a very good offer for a very good question. The last question, I'm afraid, I'm sorry, there was a lady up there, but we really have to close. You, please.
I'm Cristina Fernandez, and I'm from the Rehabilitation for Addicted Prisoners Trust, and we have programs in prison. I'm very interested to know and ask a question to John Biggin, and coming from what Peter Klaas mentioned before, about the devastating impact of MPS across prisons. So how do you manage a success of a program with a terrible influence and the riddle of MPS in prison?
John, goes to you.
Well, it's a good question. It's a challenge. The key to being able to operate any rehabilitative culture within prison is to try very hard to get some things right. First of all, you need to have a very good, to put it in very simple terms, you need to have a very good police force to try and stop not just MPS, but any other sort of drugs and contraband coming in. Then you have to have a really good program internally to educate the population into, particularly with MPS, into the dangers that those substances can bring. But it is a constant challenge. My job is to constantly manage that and constantly use intelligence to try and prevent stuff coming in and to try and reduce the harm while people are in the prison. But the key to it is to try and create an environment within the prison where you are such a rich offering. So things like the Peace Education Programme, so, some really good and engaging programs going on within the prison. And the message for the prison population then is that we will engage you with this. The deal is that in order to engage with it, you don't take drugs or you don't hit my staff. It may sound like a very simplistic model, but that's something you have to strive for all the time, to try and create that environment where actually people are more focused on the benefits of the programs and the benefits of the activities than they are about, putting those in jeopardy by being violent or taking drugs. But it is a challenge for all prison governors.
Yeah, there is one last question there. She's looking at me so forlornly, and that I feel so guilty. So, lady right in the middle there, and this is the last question.
Hello, my name is Aya. I'm from Tunisia, but I didn't come all the way from Tunisia. I'm here for a few months. And I've been not jailed, but I've been detained or arrested a couple of times. So a little bit of appetizer what jail is. Not because I think I didn't do anything bad, but because I was protesting for freedom and the revolution in Tunisia. But there were many artists and activists who were even in detention and jailed, who went out of prison, easy recruitment to the radicalized groups, which raises the question of who needs inner peace in the prison. Are they the prisoners or the staff and the police and the officers? And a shocking statistic is that in Tunisia, for example, 3,000 fighters are in Syria, which is top of the list. And some statistics show that people who go out of the prison, they go even more, they have more grievances against the system as a whole, and that makes them very vulnerable to recruitment. So that's one. The second one, I think, I myself do, I work for an organization called World Peace Initiative, and I organize retreats, meditation retreats around the world for young people. So I believe so much in inner peace. But I think sharing stories and putting people in a circle to share is not enough to make them ready to go out and face the world and society. They need some tools, they need a toolkit to go with. And I think things like practices of mindfulness, like meditation, like nonviolence communication, merged with this program of peace would be helpful. and also building some solidarity network. Of course, their families will support and so on, but I think it was so powerful for them to, in the film, to go back and meet and be in a panel empowering other people. So I think that those sessions of peace need to be more open to other toolkits or tools to use. Yeah, so one, train police, and second, a toolkit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. There's an old lesson in politics: never take the last question, because it's always the most difficult. Yeah, you answer that.
I mean, I think those were some really, really good points and really important. You know, when you've got an offender who's, you know, there's a reason that they've been given a custodial sentence, and you know, and also relating to the point about MPS and all of the drugs, you know, there's a reason people have drifted into drugs and, you know, taken substances which are having such a serious impact on their health. And I think such a massive part of that is finding that inner peace, you know, finding that inner peace through meditation or through other reflective practices or personal development practices. But any inmate needs a lot of psychosocial support. You know, it's such an important element of their rehabilitation. If you've got somebody who's triggered when they're looked at in a particular way, you know, they're going to come out and they're going to get triggered. And if their response is violence, then the chances are they're going to go back inside. So there are tools that have been developed. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of them. They're psychosocial tools that can be used to support people through those processes, you know, emotional intelligence, restorative practice. You know, there's so much there. It's almost like, you know, we're primed now to start using that, to start bringing it into the prisons, into schools, young offenders institutes, you know, all of these places which are crying out for this support. And my experience is that offenders and young people, they love it. They love it. You know, whether it is sitting around a circle and talking about experience, or doing some anger management where they're triggered into their anger management and they develop an alternative way of reacting and responding to those stimuli. They love it, and it's exciting and it's dynamic and it has a dramatic impact on their life. And we've just got to find ways of getting this into the institutions. And it's difficult because it's not just the inmates, it's the prison wardens, it's the prison governor. And if they haven't experienced it themselves, they're not going to be able to do it. So we need other organizations coming in. So it's a big task, but, you know, you just got to keep chipping away at it, finding people who can give you access and, you know, get your programs alive in those places. Yeah.
I'd just like to just very briefly say something, and that is that I actually once asked an inmate, you know, if you think that the peace education program works, and I was told, yes, it does. And then the second question I had was, why do you think it works? What do you like about it? And he said, there are no hooks. It's a standalone, simple, it is what it is. Because I guess you get very savvy to hooks when you are in prison. It's like they're being exposed to other programs where they're saying, no, it's this, but then there's another hook somewhere. And I make every single effort to make sure there are absolutely no hooks. Here it is. And when somebody can take a program and like the program so much, and this is one of the frequent requests that I get, is could you please have this peace education program for my family who are not in here yet? I want them to get involved with it so they don't end up and follow in my footsteps. When a consciousness has been raised to that level, it's truly an incredible program. It is putting the human back in the human. And that's what this really tries to do. And from there on, inner peace is always inside of you. Inner peace doesn't have to come, and it doesn't come from the ceiling, from the well. It comes from inside of you. It's always inside of you. The question then becomes, then why are we not in touch with it? And why are we not in touch with it? Is because we are in touch with everything else on the outside. We don't even know who we are. So the process begins for first understanding and starting to act with yourself, react with yourself. And then all these social tools start to make sense because you know who you're talking to. You know, it's, when you say something to yourself, you cannot lie to yourself. We become so good at lying. We can lie to anybody. You know, we walk out of our house and we look at the first person and we say, "Good morning." When in the back of our head is like, "Oh my God, what am I doing here?" You know, and here maybe we are even walking to something in a horrible, horrible place, but are thinking, "Oh yeah, good morning." Yes. What did we do with our family? Did we tell them good morning? Did we tell them I love you? We don't even know what these things mean to us. And so it is so important to fundamentally get with the program of you, of understanding who you are. And then all these steps start to make sense. But they need to be really, really simple, because this is a way for them. If it is simple, they can stick with it. If it gets complicated, it's no longer going to be right. They won't be able to sustain it. Like for anybody else on the outside, and that's exactly what happens. Because it gets too complicated, it gets debates, it gets about everything else. And peace is not about debates. Peace is about a feeling. Peace is not about talking, peace is about feeling. Thirst is not about talking. You know, if you went to a restaurant and the guy just gave you a verbal menu but never brought you food after you ordered it, you would be disappointed, to say the least. Because what that restaurant is really about is taking care of your hunger. What thirst is really about is quenching your thirst. And sometimes we forget that. The bottle becomes more important, the glass becomes more important, the formats become more important, and the essence that really what you're having is the water. And that's what's going to quench your thirst. It's forgotten.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's just my pleasure to thank all our panelists and all our event team volunteers, our co-hosts, the Prem Foundation and the Tutu Foundation, the British Film Institute. Special thanks to Helen Caton Hughes and Leslie Cooper for their hard work. And finally, thank you for contributing, being a very good, lively, appreciative audience. And one of my favorite sayings, which apparently was a favorite saying of Helena Roosevelt, was, "I'd rather light a candle than curse the dark." I think that, Prem, that's what you do.